Hey book buddies, it's Katy here, and today I'm going to be going over every single book that I read in the cursed year of our Lord, 2020. It's not that many books, don't worry. First, look at these earrings that Nikki sent me. She made these. They are strawberry frogs, like my two favorite things. I cried. Thank you, Nikki. Anyways, I sat down to plan out my usual end of the year videos where I do my best books and my worst books, and then I realized that I only read 17 books last year. So I figured I would just go through every single one that I read. First, I read City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This is the first Cassie Clare book that I had ever read. Don't hate me, but I just never read them. So my ex-boyfriend and I read the book together, and it was a fun experience, but no, I didn't like it. I thought it was awful. Sorry. If you're a fan of these books though, I get it. Like, I totally understand why the Mortal Instruments series would be as popular as it is and why it means so much to so many people, but it's not for me, so I gave it 2 stars. Next, I read Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. I have a review of that, which I will leave in the description. This was another one that I thought was awful. I have a love-hate relationship with Dan Brown where I love to read his books because they're fun and I find enjoyment in reading them, but I also at the same time am always very annoyed because I don't like his writing style at all. I think it's pretentious. But if you want to see me rant about that, it's a 20-minute long video of me just listing everything I hate about it. I also gave that one 2 stars. Next, I read Summers at Castle Auburn by Sharon Shin. This is a YA fantasy historical novel. It's got a light romance, it has political intrigue, and it was just really fun. It kind of reminded me of Ella Enchanted, just in the mood. It was very cozy. Really enjoyed that one, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Sapphos Fragments, translated by Anne Carson, and it's Sappho, so 5 stars. Next, I read City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. Again, I read this one with my boyfriend. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that I'm probably not gonna finish the series. We read the first 2 together. It was fun. We took turns reading it aloud to each other. It was, you know, it was a cute pastime at the time, but since I didn't really enjoy the series and since that is over, I don't really feel like reading the rest of it would be that fun for me, so I'm not going to. But I also gave that one 2 stars. And I also want to say that scene in the fairy court, what? Ew. Next, I read Ravenswood by Janet Louise Roberts. I got into this phase where I just had this deep-seated need to read 70s Gothic romance paperback books, and this is one of them. I fell in love with the cover and looked everywhere for it, and then my very sweet ex-boyfriend found it for me and bought it for me, and I feel really bad because he looked everywhere for it, and it was horrible. It was probably the worst book I read all year. Lots of glorified sexual assault in it. The writing was not good. The story didn't make any sense. She was like a spy who married a man who was rich, and they moved to his mansion, and he was not very nice, and she thought that he was cheating on her, but it turned out he wasn't, spoilers, but she thought that he was cheating on her. He like sexually assaulted her a couple times. It had a disabled character. I think it might have had 2 disabled characters, and they were not represented well. And yeah, it was bad. It was awful. But the cover is breathtaking, so there's that. I gave it 1.5 stars. Next, I read Sunshine by Robin McKinley. My relationship with Sunshine is an interesting one because while I was reading it, I kept laughing because it's ridiculous, but it's also really fun. I think at some point I'll reread it and do a full video on it. I don't know why I didn't, because I had a ton of thoughts about it, and then I just never made a video about it. Probably because 2020 was a year from hell and I was lazy and didn't really want to make a video. But Sunshine is Originally, it was written for adults, and then they remarketed it as a YA. I'm not really sure why that happened, but I consider it to be for adults. It's about our main character, Sunshine, that's her name. She runs a bakery, she makes cinnamon rolls, and in this world, there are vampires. She gets kidnapped by a bunch of vampires, and then she meets a vampire, Constantine. Doesn't matter how bad the book is. If there's a vampire with dark hair and a tragic past, I'm gonna fall in love with them. And I did. But the writing style is pretty far away from how Robin McKinley usually writes. I've read some of her other books like Spindle's End, and they all have sort of a fairy tale vibe. This one is written in first person, and it's supposed to be set, it's not modern day, it's in the future, I guess. Since it's in first person, you can tell she's trying to be relatable. And like the main character kept making jokes that weren't funny, but then laughing at her own jokes, which honestly, that is very relatable. That's what I do. So it was kind of endearing in that way, but it was also a little annoying. The funniest thing about it though, and I won't go too far into detail about it because I do think at some point I'll want to make its own dedicated video for it, but the funniest thing to me that we start off, we know that the main character runs a bakery, everything seems normal, nothing seems off, and then on page like 20, we just casually discover that vampires exist in this world and everyone knows about them. But she introduces it on like page 20, so it makes you think at first that this will be the kind of urban fantasy where she discovers the vampires and it's like a magical, mystical thing. No, they are just completely commonplace in this universe. So that's all fine and well. Then we get another maybe 20 pages and we discover that there are other things like trolls and werewolves. Fun, okay, that makes sense because there are vampires, so there would be other things. There was this fight called the Voodoo Wars, which maybe you could have picked a different title for that, but and after the Voodoo Wars, all of these creatures were discovered and they just walk among the people, but there's a lot of discrimination if you're not a human. Then we get like 100 pages into this book, and then she decides to tell us that she has magic, and she has this whole time, and she knew that she had this whole time. Out of nowhere, so you're going along, oh, vampires are a thing. That's pretty shocking, weird to dump that on me, but all right. Then you keep going, oh, okay, trolls, that's fine. And then, oh, she has magic, great. And then we find out that she's part, like, troll. She just keeps, it's hilarious because you get settled and you think you know what's going on, but this narrator is unreliable because she just withholds this very pertinent information and then just springs it on you like it's nothing. With no setup, it's jarring. It's hilarious. But that being said, I gave it 4 stars because I had a fun time reading it. It's not 4 stars for quality, it's 4 stars for fun. Next, I read Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. You're gonna start noticing a trend here. I went through a vampire phase. I'm a mood reader, and I was in one of my vampire moods, and I read a lot of vampire books last year. So Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. This is the first book in the Sookie Stackhouse series, which is what the True Blood series on HBO is based off of, and I hated it. I thought it was very bad. I vlogged the experience of reading it, and I will leave a link to that vlog in the description, so if you want to check it out and hear my more in-depth thoughts on it, you can go look at that. But just suffice it to say that I thought it was really bad, and I gave it 2 stars. But I did hear that True Blood is pretty good, so at some point I'll probably watch that. I have nothing else to do. Next, I read Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. This is another vampire book, but this one is actually good. Fledgling is about a vampire. They're actually called Aina in this world, but they're vampires. Our main character is an Aina who has amnesia. She does not remember where she came from. She doesn't remember who she is. She doesn't remember who her family is. Nothing. She's just in the woods, severely burned, no memory, and hungry. And then as she goes on through the story, she starts to find out who she is and where she came from, and find out about Aina in this world. And it's very cool because Octavia E. Butler is fantastic at sci-fi, and so she adds sci-fi elements into this vampire story. So you kind of get the sense that maybe Aina are aliens. It's not confirmed, but that's my theory. It's also horrifying. She eats a person, like a whole person. She doesn't drink their blood, she eats a human being. I do just want to say that if you decide to read this, you should be aware that the main character looks like a child. She is not a fully grown Aina, but she's about 45 years old, I think, if I'm remembering that right. She's 45, so she's mature, but she is in the body of a child. And she does very adult things with adults. So I know that a lot of people find that aspect of this book really uncomfortable, and to be honest, I did too. There were a couple of pages that I just skipped because I didn't want to engage with that, and I think the conversation deserves nuance because she is an adult, but she's still in a child's body, and that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people to read and potentially triggering. So I do just want to let you all know that that is in this book. So you may not want to engage with it if that's something that you think could potentially really hurt you. For me, it was fine. I just skipped those scenes that made me feel a little icky, and I found the rest of the book to be fantastic. So I gave it 4.5 stars. Next, I read The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is not a vampire book. Finally, I took a break from vampire books for a while, but it is a horror. It's a cosmic horror, and I read it for Halloween. It is very short. You can read it in a sitting, and it's a retelling of The Occurrence at Red Hook by Lovecraft, but it's anti-Lovecraftian. So it's about a black man who's living in Harlem in the 20s as he goes through kind of the events of The Occurrence at Red Hook. And so there's this undercurrent of racism behind all of this Lovecraftian horror, and I personally find cosmic horror to be terrifying because I'm very scared of space and I'm very scared of the ocean. So this book was a lot for me. I was scared, but it was so good, and I really liked the way that Victor LaValle turned Lovecraft on its head, and I really like anti-Lovecraftian stories. I'd like to read more in the future, and this one was very good, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I went back to the vampire books. This book I loved. I had never read it before, and it's very good. I don't know why it took me so long to read it, because it's just fantastic, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I really enjoyed this book. It's about a Mexican socialite whose cousin has just recently married a wealthy English man, and they live in a creepy, rundown, mansion-esque house on a hill in a very small town. And then her cousin starts to write to her some pretty disturbing things, and they think that maybe her cousin needs some help. So Noemi, the main character, goes to visit her cousin and see what's going on, and then you uncover a lot of weird. Basically, you're like, is this a haunted house? What's going on with this family? Why are there mushrooms everywhere? It's icky. And I gave it 4.5 stars. The 13th book that I read in 2020 was Radiant by Grace Draven. It wasn't very heavy on plot. It's about a woman who, she's a human, basically. She's called, their race is called something else, but she's a human. And she is put into an arranged marriage with a creature that, again, I forgot the name of, but basically a dark elf, but kind of scarier. Like, they have fangs, they have creepy glowing eyes, and they look like a cross between a dark elf and kind of like an orc. And they are physically repulsed by one another. And then they become best friends, and then they fall in love. So that's nice. It's smutty, obviously. I thought the writing was okay. It was light. It wasn't super heavy. I read it very quickly. It was all right. I tried to read the sequel and did not finish it, so I will say that. But I enjoyed the first one okay, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad. I did a longer sort of discussion video on this, which I'll leave in the description for you to watch. But essentially this book is what the title implies. It's about white feminism and the history of white feminism and how that affects Black women and women of color and can be very harmful. And she goes into a whole lot of detail. It's a fantastic read. I would highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I made a video on this one, just absolutely gushing, and I will leave that review in the description. I gave this book 5 stars. It's probably my favorite book that I read all of last year. It's a YA, it has fairies in it. I love it. The writing is beautiful, the fairy lore is beautiful, the world building is beautiful. If you like fairy fiction, you should just read it. Take my word for it. Next, I read Austinland by Shannon Hale. This book is cute. It was a reread. My best friend Reagan got it for me a couple of years ago. I don't know why I said a couple, it was a long time ago. It was freshman year of high school. And yeah, I wanted to reread it because I was going through a tough time at this point. This was right after my cat passed away, so I started reading fluffy romances before my breakup. So I wanted to read something comforting and short and extremely lighthearted. There is a movie based on this book, which is pretty good. It has J.J. Field in it, and he's a snack. And Jennifer Coolidge. For those of you who don't know what it's about a modern day woman named Jane. She's in her 30s, and she is single perpetually because she has very, very high expectations because of Jane Austen novels. And her great-grandmother leaves in her will a whole planned trip for Jane to go to this place called Austinland, which is just this immersive experience where you go and you pretend that you are in the Regency period. You dress completely like it is the year 1816. You speak in proper Austonian English. And then they have actors who are like romantic interests. And it's like a dating sim, but in real life. It's fun. I gave it 3.75 stars. Finally, the last book that I read in 2020 was The Castle by Barbara Cartland. Barbara Cartland she is someone that I do not know how to verbalize the way that she makes me feel. This is a picture of her. She wrote over 200 romance novels. She dictated them to her secretaries. She is related to Princess Diana. She only wears pink. She has a bunch of dogs. She passed away. And her specialty is romance novels that are pure romance. So no sex. Not before you're married. You'll go to hell. Barbara Cartland is so interesting because on the one hand, she is everything that I want to be, but on the other hand, she's kind of an anti-feminist and some of her views are a little but her books, they're fun. They're all the same story, but the story is a fun one. The Castle, I cannot remember what it's about. I know that we have our main lady. She's French and she is upper society. She meets a duke who is kindly, but who she doesn't like for no apparent reason. She meets another gentleman who turns out not to be a gentleman, and then the duke and her realize that they're in love. I remember nothing else. I know she falls off of a horse. If you've ever seen a Barbara Cartland movie, which I highly recommend watching a Barbara Cartland movie, you'll notice that that's the plot in all of those as well. It's kind of just what she does. However, if you do watch The Lady and the Highwayman, it's the one with Hugh Grant. Fast forward past the beginning because there's a dog that is like murdered on screen. It's awful. So I never finished that movie because I was watching it and that happened and I was like, oh. But the one with Helena Bonham Carter, I think it's called Hazard of Hearts. It might be called War of Hearts. Two of Hearts. Hazard of Hearts, I think it's called. That's a great movie. It's ridiculous and so much fun. But I decided at this point that I was gonna read just every single Barbara Cartland novel, all 200 and something of them. Yeah, but then my boyfriend broke up with me and now I really don't want to read romance, so I'm gonna come back to that. But The Castle was very forgettable. and fun. Fun, but forgettable. And I gave it 2.5 stars. So that's every single book that I read in 2020. I know a lot of people used lockdown as a time to be very productive and to read many, many books, and I did not. I used it to do absolutely nothing, and that's okay. Here's hoping I read more books this year. I've only read 2 this month, so it's not looking great, but I'll try. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite and least favorite reads of 2020 were, and thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all again very soon with a new video, but until then, happy reading.